Now, I know for a fact that not each and every one of you has access to the newest version of Blender due to hardware limitations. And yes, this course and all the other courses in the core course package, that's kind of a tongue twister, are aimed at Blender 4.2. But I want to give you the knowledge to improve your scenes inside of Eevee if you're using an older version of Eevee instead of Eevee Next. So let's dive into Blender and let's learn a little bit about the older settings for Eevee. Okay, so here I have this little project that is a great way to show some of the settings that we can enable. This overall doesn't look terrible. However, there are some major things missing, especially if you compare this to cycles. We're missing quite a few things. Well, this is brighter and that makes sense because cycles works a little bit better with bounce lighting and stuff. But even if we, forget about that, we're still seeing things like reflections, we're getting nice shadows, volumetric lighting, stuff like that. And there's all this good stuff going on. So let's get working on improving the look inside of Eevee. First thing we want to enable over here is ambient occlusion. And immediately if we do that, let me just turn it on and off a couple of times, is we're getting some of that nice shadowing and intersecting parts over here. That already looks that much more realistic. So turning on ambient occlusion is a good thing. Next, we have bloom. Let's also enable that. And this will give us this nice volumetric lighting effect around all of these lights in our scene. We can change the amount of bloom if we want to. We can make it more, we can make it bigger. Maybe bigger is better for sort of this hazy spaceship interior. So let's just turn up the radius here. We can also change the color a little bit, make it more bluish, for example. But anyways, overall, adding in bloom is a nice addition. Now, as far as I know, the default settings for bloom are quite strong. So what I would recommend you to do is to turn down the intensity to about half of the default value. So about 0.02 instead of 0.05. That makes things just a little bit more realistic because overall the default setting, it's quite strong and quite heavy. Now, the next thing we want to do is something called screen space reflections. And we spoke about screen space or screen trace rendering before. Basically what this does, it will look at your scene and it will see wherever reflections are supposed to be, like for example on the floor here, and it will add those in. So if you turn that on, that's a major change. However, you're not getting reflections in parts which aren't basically visible to the camera. So the reflections in, for example, these panels here are not visible, and we'll need to bake those down using a reflection map, but we'll go over that in just a bit. Now, finally, we have volumetrics. There is some volumetrics in this scene, so I'm just going to enable volumetric lighting, which will add in another nice hazy look, and I'm also going to add in volumetric shadows, making things look a little bit better. You can also increase the quality or decrease it if your computer needs that, and you can change the distribution here if you want to. Very similar to how it's done in Eevee Next. Then we have the shadows. We want to make those look as good as possible. Like I said, in Eevee Next, we have a resolution slider, but in the older version, we actually have to select sort of the size in pixels for the shadow maps. So let's just up those, make them as good as possible, essentially. And the final thing that we can do is we can bake down the lights and we can bake down the reflections to have the most realistic render possible inside of Eevee if you're not using Eevee Next. So let's go ahead and do that. First of all, let's go Shift A, a light probe, and we're going to go reflection cube map. As you can see, it will add in this spherical thing right here. I'm just going to move this to the main collection. There we go. And what we want to do is we want to take this thing and basically scale it to be roughly the size of the entire quarter. So I'm going to go for something like this. Going to align it a little bit more here since our camera is somewhere over here, I believe. Yep, there it is. We don't need reflections all the way in the back here, so just putting it over here should be fine. And let's open up the data properties here. I think a box could actually work a little bit better. Let's put it on box there. Yeah, there we go. Let's scale this guy down. Align it like so. Yeah, overall, this looks pretty good to me. All right, so now we have our reflection cube map in here, and we're going to need to bake it down in just a bit. And the other thing we want to add is our irradiance volume, which we're going to use to bake down our lights. So I'm just going to add that in here. Let's go into solid view again. And we're also going to scale this guy up. So SY, move it on the Y axis a little bit, SY, make sure it's in the right collection there, G and Y, and that should cover most of it. I think I'm going to go with something like this. And in this case, there's all of these dots inside of the irradiance volume, which sort of determine the density of our light bake. And the resolution over here, 444, is currently representative of these dots, right? So there's 4, 4, 4, 4. Now I think the 4 and 4 on the Z and X are decent, so we don't necessarily need more there, but we do need more over on the Y axis, so we get a more even distribution. So I'm just going to increase this until we get a nicely spaced out version. Something like this looks pretty good to me. Yeah, I think that could work. We have both our irradiance volume and our reflection cube map set up, and I'm just going to go in rendered view so you can actually see the difference happening once we bake that down. So let's go over to the render properties here, and I'm going to go look for something called indirect lighting. There it is. In here, you can bake the lighting down. So first of all, let's increase the bake size. Again, I'm going to go for something like 2048, make it nice and big. And we're going to go and say bake indirect lighting. Now this will also bake the reflection map. So it's just going to be one task. It's going to take a while to do, but once it's done, you'll immediately see a major improvement. So look at the screen, make sure you check that out and see it happen in real time. All right, and there we go. We now get amazing reflections inside of all of these panels. It's not that easy to see, but they are actually in there. There's reflections in these panels, reflections in there. And we also get our lighting all baked down. So we get the most natural look and we get the best possible lighting and global illumination before you could use Eevee Next. So if you have to use Eevee and you can't use Eevee Next because of hardware limitations, or you just don't have an option to use 4.2, then using these settings will make sure you get the best results possible.